Good morning, sunshines. Another day in directing. Oh yeah, you got your showcast. That's great. Auditions are done. You've got everybody committed. Everybody's excited. There's a lot of energy around the show. Usually around this time. The first thing I want to show you before I give you any information, I want to show you this little interview with Sam Mendes. He's if you don't know Sam, he's a director for stage shows, but also for theater pieces. But this is a little bit of information that his approach to rehearsals. So enjoy this a little bit. We'll talk about it after.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your working methodology and working with that company and the way you arrange a rehearsal room in a circle, the way that you have the company there for the duration of the rehearsal process, and how you really begin to sort of push and pull at scenes and 3D literary criticism and then how you sort of compute and arrange your production based on that. What do you get out of your working process? How do you work with your actors? How does it work in the rehearsal room?
It's interesting. When I was a student, I didn't have a methodology, and as a young director, I struggled, and I in that regard, I didn't have a way to approach a play that was consistent, I felt. And so I remember reading a lot of books about directing and thinking, well, I'll try that, I'll try this. And like anything, it's trial and error. And it emerged gradually out of what I enjoy in a rehearsal room, and what I found the best way was to explore something with the people that you're working with. You know, you have 20 other imaginations in the room with you as a director, and you're an idiot if you don't use those imaginations. And there are some incredibly intelligent people in the room with you who see it with every bit as much insight as you do. You know, your job is editorial to a degree. But for me, it actually emerged out of Othello here. That was the first time I worked with a lot of people in the room. I put out a lot of rugs, and I thought, I'm going to try just keeping the company together and experimenting with scenes. Playing games sometimes it will be simple things like I'll switch the roles in a scene. I remember a fantastic day of Othello where Claire Skinner, who was playing Desdemona, played Othello, and David Harewood played Desdemona, and it was revelatory to both of them, and it helped that, you know, so that's just a very simple idea. Sometimes it will be I will involve the group a lot, you know, in terms of in this production, the full company, the kind of core of 21 became the Knights for 6 weeks of rehearsals until the Knights arrived. But by the time the Knights actually arrived, the supernumeraries, we had experimented with any number of different ways of using them because the company had become that group. It's just a way of exploring the play, and sometimes it can be silly. If you feel the mood getting too dark or too dry, perhaps too academic, then you can play something that's a little, that you can unlock a scene through a physical trick. So I remember a rehearsal 12th night in which we played a scene as if they were rowing a boat across a lake, and I know it sounds stupid, but it released the scene physically. They didn't think about text anymore. They related to each other completely accurately because there were two people sitting next to each other, and they had to row at the same time. And the teamwork of the scene and the physical life of the scene, it came to life. Sometimes you will find that you know, you set a scene around a dinner table, for example, for no reason except that you have a feeling that the dynamics will be better revealed of the family around a dinner table. And someone loses their temper, you don't want them to wave their hands, so you give them knife and fork. I mean, you'll go down a very specific route. Now, in the case of this play, the first scene, we spent a lot of time, and right up to very late in the day, there were different versions. I mean, completely different versions of the first scene. One of them, and one of the most interesting, was a dinner scene between Lear and the whole family, in which on a predetermined cue, the men stood up and backed off, leaving the women sitting there, unaware. I mean, like a trick, they're playing on the women, a joke. And Lear said, yeah, I've got a little thing, we've all arranged this, the men, because we know there's going to be a big present-giving ceremony. I'm going to give you my nation. I'm going to give you a third each. Now, you know, you play along with my game and tell me how much you love me. And the men were all in on it, drinking, and it was late, and it was almost as if it was the end of a dinner party. And it was sinister. It was a male-dominated society. It was unfair on the women. It was exposing. And it worked very interestingly. But then there was this other version of the scene, which is this version that you'll see tonight, which was completely different. It was a very public scene. It was very exposing. It was very politically oriented. The presence of the soldiers was very made it both public and threatening. It was clear that if the wrong things were said, there was not a comfortable environment in which to be yourself. It was it increased the level of tension. So anyway, that's a good example. But there were many versions of that scene, and of course there are things that happen in the circle that you can never bring onto a bigger stage. It's much easier. The journey from the circle to full production at the Donmar is almost straight on stage. I mean, we did the whole of Twelfth Night in the circle, and we just moved it onto the stage. I mean, I kept everyone in the room until about 3 days from the end, and only then did little specific adjustments. But for me, it's just a way of also freeing myself from sometimes getting stuck with one or two ideas and repeating myself. I mean, I think that, it's very difficult to, you do find yourself repeating certain things, and there are things that I use in this production that I've used before. You probably would notice the long table from the trial scene in The Winter's Tale. Even the behind us is very similar, or the wheat field from a production of As You Like It, or whatever. There are things that you find yourself returning to, but that's also because Shakespeare returns to them as well, and there are echoes within his work that are actually quite enjoyable to explore. So that's the working method. It's come out of trial and error, and it's very eccentric, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone else, really. I don't think I write a book and say this is the way you need to rehearse. It's very personal, and I think a lot of it's about losing self-consciousness, and being able to talk in a way. The other thing that happens, which I think is very important, is that actors play and lose self-consciousness. There's a sort of throwing yourself into the water. It's a little scary the first time, but once you've got through it, you've made a fool of yourself once. It's sort of, you lose self-consciousness as performers as well. And people are willing to try things and be free with things because they know that there's no right or wrong. There's no entrance, there's no exit, there's no audience. Because you're not facing that way, you're facing any way you face, and I try to move so that they don't perform towards me.
Yes.
So I move, dot around the circle, make it comfortable. People are sitting on floors, some people are sitting in chairs, some people have armchairs. I try and keep them moving as well so that people don't always go back to the same place. Sometimes you'll start a scene just by sitting on the floor and talking the scene to each other, and then you'll have people come together and do a closer version, expanded version, and then you grow out of that. And then sometimes you get it right the first time. I mean, literally, you have to recognize when something special has happened. You'll experiment with other things, but you'll always have that first version of the scene in your head. And there's a line from Polonius in Hamlet. He says, and I've quoted this to you before, but he says, "We shall by indirections find directions out." And that's a great descriptive line about my rehearsal process.
Mm-hmm.
If you go down enough blind alleys, you might find the one that leads somewhere.
So you can see that what I'm about to tell you, he would say to throw it out the window, which gives me a lot of hope that what I'm going to say is important. But again, that's after 25, 30 years of doing this. Everybody is going to develop their own style, their own way of working, but that's true of anything. If I was teaching you how to draw, if I was teaching you how to write, you eventually are going to develop your own style and are going to leave behind these simple steps that I'm going to talk about. But mostly what I'm going to talk about are things to just familiarize you with the things that are going to happen in rehearsal so you're not blindsided when they appear. Yes? Now, first of all, we've talked about this before, but just to remind you, there are 4 phases of the rehearsal period. We'll talk about each of these phases over the next couple class periods. But once the show is cast, the first phase of rehearsal is the table work, is characterization work. Now again, if you have a limited amount of rehearsal time, that can be sort of incorporated into the blocking rehearsals, and so you can sort of spend less time working specifically with the characters. But I would tell you, especially in shows that have a lot of psychological background or history in them, you gain a great deal by sitting down with actors without having to worry about standing or walking or talking, just as Mr. Mendes was talking about in his video. Just spend some time with the actors discussing the characters, possible motivations. You don't necessarily have to have all the answers. You're working with very smart people who've also been developing their characters. And again, when you are looking at the play as a whole, whereas they are looking at the characters specifically, your job, as Mr. Mendes suggests, it becomes more of an editor. I would much rather work with actors who are constantly bringing me new ideas and new approaches and new ways of presenting the character, and then have my job be to edit what we're going to have them do, or things that are working and things that are not. It just, that way it doesn't rely on my life experience to fully funnel all the information through me. Now, again, as a director, you have to be prepared when the actor isn't to come up with those things, yes? Now, the second phase, just get through the 4 phases real quick. The second phase is the blocking, physically standing things up. We're going to spend the whole day talking about strong positions and weak positions and creating stage pictures. That's very important as a director, to make sure that the actors can be visible to the audience members on stage. That is a very important role of the director. Again, the third part is what I'm going to call polishing. You're really, there's a step in between there where you have to have the actors get off book. Yes, that can be an extremely frustrating time for directors, because again, the actors are going to have to trust their line knowledge. And again, there are some actors who are just very good. They'll be off book after one run. There are some actors, and again, I'm not trying to say all of them, but age tends to have actors, or have people lose some memory, lose the ability to memorize lines necessarily. And so, especially if you're dealing with some people who may be of an age, it may take them a little longer to get off book, and you may even schedule additional rehearsals just for them and stage managers to go over their lines. Yes? So again, you have to shape the rehearsals based upon the way that you see the show happening. We'll talk a little bit more about that in coming up. And then the last part is pacing, the rhythm of the show, where the things need to speed up, where they need to slow down, where the tempos, where the rhythms are. Again, those, in a well-formed play, the pacing is sort of the last thing to come around, as far as a well-made play versus just a play that's barely made it and everybody got off book, or may not even be off book opening night. I mean, I'm just being honest with you, that will occur. Yes. Again, there are the first rehearsal. You're going to have these great hopes, these great desires. You're going to sit there and you're going to tell your concept to the cast, and they're going to, just be so overwhelmed that they're going to standing ovation for you. The problem with that is that I will guarantee you most, if not all, the people in the play have not yet read the play. And if they have, they've mostly been focused on the character that they have been cast as. And so they're not really that in tune with the story that's being told. And so it may well be that the first rehearsal is given more to the design team for presentations. First of all, if you have an equity show, equity is the Actors Equity Association, is the union of professional actors. If there's an equity show, you have to have an equity stage manager, unless you've got a rider from the equity. But the first thing that happens in an equity show is that the actors actually physically sign their contract. Sometimes the actor has signed their contract before the first rehearsal, but usually an actor will wait till that first rehearsal because they are waiting for better offers. And if they sign a contract with your theater and Broadway calls, they can't go to Broadway until you finish your contract, or they can buy themselves out of your contract, but it costs them money. So usually equity actors will wait till the first rehearsal to sign the contract, and then once the contracts are signed, the first thing that needs to happen is those equity members need to go and elect a deputy among themselves. A deputy is the representative from the union as an arbiter between any issues that might arise between the cast and the production company. It cannot be your stage manager. Now, it is your stage manager until a deputy is elected. And let's say you may have a couple of equity actors who may be not at the first rehearsal. For instance, let's say you've got a show where the 2 leads are going to be equity, and the rest of the cast is going to go ahead and rehearse for a week before the leads show up. It may be that you don't have a quorum, or you don't have the people there to vote for a deputy. So the stage manager will be deputy until the deputy is elected. You may not know who the deputy is. Equity doesn't have to, says that the cast does not have to inform the director or the production company who the director is. Again, the thought being that for some reason the director and or the rest of the company might hold issues against the deputy, but the deputy will take whatever issues, whatever, if it's, you're not getting your rent that an actor was promised for their tap shoes or something. You don't have your M&Ms in your bowl the way it was in your rider. Whatever the problem the actor has, it's their job to go to equity and say the company is not fulfilling their obligations, contractual obligations, and the company doesn't necessarily need to know who that deputy is. Now, usually you do. Usually you know who the deputy is. Everybody's very forthcoming, all that sort of stuff. But you don't have to. Yes. But the other thing that has to happen, usually you're going to have costume designers there who are going to, present their sketches, but they're also going to have their staff there to take measurements a lot of times. You're going to have stage managers who are going to be passing out things like rehearsal schedules, like contact lists. You're going to have publicity people that are going to be passing out bio information, or at least request forms for actors to give them bios. They're going to need to schedule headshots possibly, or photo shots of the show, photo calls, that sort of stuff. So there's just a lot of extraneous business that is going to happen at that first rehearsal that may mean that you may need to take a back seat to everyone else, because once you get all their issues taken care of, then you can pare it down to just you and the cast, and you can actually get down to the rehearsal process. Now, I know directors who find reading through the play a waste of time. I am not one of those people. I think reading through the play with the entire company gives the entire company a chance to understand how each character fits into the whole, but also gives everybody a chance to hear the play. And again, eventually, there's just a big difference between hearing a play and reading a play. Obviously, eventually it's going to be on its feet, and there's an even bigger difference between seeing a play and reading a play. But just hearing the play with the right voices of the characters that have been cast, a lot of times will clue them in as to the way, the direction of the show. If it's going to be comedy, if it's going to be tragedy, the kind of voices that they're being matched up against may spark some, again, if you have a dramaturg that's a part of the presentation, you may have discussions about meanings of words, pronunciation of words. If you have a fight choreographer, you might have schedule fight meetings, or choreographers, you might schedule meetings about choreography, learning to dance, that sort of stuff, that you can then use all their learning in those rehearsal periods is the practices of those techniques. They're not necessarily learning the actual choreography for the show, if that makes sense. In other words, a lot of times, especially if you're doing something like Shakespeare where they're going to have a sword fight in it, you just need to spend the time to teach people how to appropriately stage sword fight. And then after you've got those lessons under their belt, then you can teach them the actual stage movement of the particular fight. Same thing with choreography. You need to teach people how to waltz and then teach them the choreography, where they're going to direct or dance on the show separately. So again, a lot of those type of things are going to happen in the first rehearsal. Read-through can be the main goal of it. It depends on how much time you have to commit to those things. Again, the more prepared you and your crew and your staff are, and of course the shorter the show is. If you've got a 5-hour show, you're not going to get it all read and all that other stuff done in one day. But if you've got an hour-and-a-half show, and you've got a 3-hour rehearsal, you may spend an hour and a half doing all the business stuff, take a break, and then have an hour and a half of the show itself. Yes. But again, I would just urge you to minimize your expectations of that first rehearsal. Once you've gotten into the cast there, you're going to need to make some welcoming statement. It does not have to be your conceptual statement. It can just be a generic, I am so happy to be working with each and every one of you. I can't tell you how I've been looking forward to this project, kind of thing. But it doesn't necessarily have to get down to the meat and bones of the actual production process. That can wait until the character meetings that are going to follow, or again, they can happen during the blocking sequence if you're not going to have character meetings. one of the things you're going to go through is usually during the auditions, you have asked for conflicts from the actors that they have foreseen, and if you have prepared a preliminary rehearsal schedule, or if you can just say we're going to rehearse Monday through Friday from 7:30 to 10 or whatever the rules are, and then at audition say, list any conflicts. And I'm in class on Tuesday and Thursday till 7:35. Okay, well, we'll start 5 minutes late on those days, 10 minutes late to give them time to get there. Various things, I've got church on Wednesday night, so you, instead of a Wednesday night rehearsal, you decide to have a Saturday afternoon rehearsal. Whatever the issues that have been there when you got the audition form, you probably have taken care of in negotiating to cast the member. However, I will tell you that once you get into rehearsals, actors are gonna have come up with conflicts that were not even mentioned, weddings that are gonna happen. Eventually, grandparents often get ill and may need attending to. I'll put it that way, as opposed to passing away. There's just going to be problems that actors are going to have to deal with during the course of the production. Understudies, cast them, use them, prepare them, because I'm going to tell you, half the time, the understudy goes on in a show, somewhere, sometime. At AUM, at least half the time, an understudy goes on. Maybe not so much in regional theaters, but still, you're gonna have the need to cover yourself. So cast them. Let them be assistant stage managers. Let them have some other duty in the run of the show, so they're not just sitting backstage waiting. But it's better to have too many people and then not enough. And then if the actor, no matter how fantastic the actor is, if they can't be a part of the process is gonna build without them, and it's gonna leave them behind. And so, again, it's a hard decision to make as a director when to just sever ties. But if you're sailing along and this actor is causing you not to proceed, cut the rope. Just say bye. You know what? We'll work again next time. I understand it's personal issues. I understand you want to be here, but you're dragging us down, and having an understudy there to help take care of that issue will often help. Again, stage managers, technically, it is a stage. Any rehearsal is a stage manager's meeting. Now, this is difficult, especially early on, to understand, because the stage manager doesn't really have any duty in the first couple of rehearsals. But the stage manager is the person who's going to make sure that everybody's there, is going to make sure they're on time, is going to make sure they're warmed up, all that stuff. Cede that responsibility to the stage manager. You and the stage manager need to have a well-oiled working relationship. The better you can communicate with your stage manager, the more you can focus on the actors and on the show itself, and the more they can focus on dealing with issues like can't be a rehearsal, like contacting people who are running late, all those sort of issues that may come about during the course of rehearsal, making sure information is passed along to the various department heads about adding props or changing costumes or having people roll on the ground or whatever the issues are. Trust that your stage manager is going to do their job to make sure that everybody is aware of those issues, and that way you can just focus on the actual developing of the rehearsal process. Yes. Daily calls. One of the things that's going to happen is that you're going to have an outline of the rehearsal schedule. But you're going to find that there are rehearsals that you get ahead on, and you're going to find there are rehearsals that you get late on. And so you need to be in the habit at the end of each rehearsal to sit down with the stage manager to make what's called the next day's daily call. Now, if the daily call, if you're right on schedule and the next call is exactly as it is on the rehearsal schedule, great. Just call the people we've scheduled, yes? But usually in the course of, if you've got 5-week rehearsal period and 5 rehearsals a week, that's 25 rehearsals, at least 5 of them are gonna not work the way you had hoped them to work. If you're really good. If you're not really good, as your first try, it may be that none of them work the way you had hoped them to work. So you just need to plan for, at the end of rehearsal, leaving time for you and the stage manager to sit down so the stage manager can email out the next day's call, including, they can include any kind of things like costume fitting and other things the actors may need to know. But just be aware at the end of every rehearsal, before you leave and pack up, you're going to need to sit down with the stage manager just to plan the next day or the next week's activity, just to make sure that you stay on schedule. Now, as a director, you're also going to have a lot of actors who are going to come to you with their issues. And I'm not saying don't listen to them. I am saying to make them aware that while they may be telling you their issue, they need to make the stage manager aware of the issues, especially if they're not going to be in rehearsal, because you are dealing with 30 people, including cast and crew. Your job is not to keep track of it, but that's the stage manager's job. While, especially if it's a lead actor, you will want to sympathize and maybe even sit down with them later and have a discussion about things, but they still need to make the stage manager aware of the situation. And again, developing that relationship with the stage manager is a very vital and very important issue. Just dealing with conflicts. Anytime there's a conflict among a cast or crew, or a cast and crew, as a director, I would warn you against taking sides. The problem, and just in life, listen. Hear what they have to say. Feel for them, empathize with them. I would stray away from suggesting solutions, unless, if it's something that's really serious, like someone has been mistreated or some harassment has taken place. You may even need to pursue it with the producer to different arenas. I wouldn't hide those things. That's the worst thing to do, is hide those things, because those things just, if they're kept in the dark, like any kind of evil thing, it tends to grow and foster, permission. But if it's just day-to-day worry, listen to the actors. If it's, bad breath, again, buy some mints maybe, and have the stage manager put them in their goodie box and suggest to the cast that they might all try some mints. Again, I wouldn't necessarily call out names necessarily. Have some mouthwash, some deodorant around, that you might, again, I would have the stage manager make the comments, keeping you out of the conflict. Yes, because again, you never know. The worst case scenario, if you've got some actors who are having relationship issues, and to get involved, as you might guess, in relationship issues, there's just no way to win, because either they resolve their issues and you wind up being on the bad guy because you suggested they separate, or they don't resolve their issues and they blame you for their separation. There's just no way to win in those situations. So hear them, listen to them, empathize with them, but ultimately your job is to stay away from the conflict. Yes, keep away from it, and again, make your stage manager aware, so they are aware of things and not blindsided. You must make it obvious that while you are welcoming of others' ideas and opinions, you are still the director and the ultimate arbiter. Yes? Again, dealing with actors with egos, sometimes you have to say, is the battle worth fighting, right? Do I really, really want to cause this issue? How important is it that they not have a mustache, or that they shave their head, or whatever? Whatever the issue may be, that something has arisen out of nowhere. You may need to say, okay, we're gonna let the actor win in this case because it's not that important. Or you may say, you know what? I wish you'd have brought this up earlier, because this is non-changeable, this is the way we're going. But ultimately, it comes down to you as the director to make the choices that are going to define the show and tell the story that you're telling. And actors need to understand that and be aware of that and appreciate that. And good actors will. Bad actors are exactly that. They're selfish. They can't see the whole picture. They are demanding oftentimes just to have the show their authority and their power. And again, you can't nurture that, you can't feed that. Because once you accept this situation, it's just going to lead to another situation where they're going to call you out on something else, yes? So as soon as you can, make sure people know who's in charge. As you're planning your action for each day, one of the most important things I can tell you as a director for your shaping of your show is to understand the energy of the show. You need to understand not only the energy of the whole show, the arcs, the highs, the lows, but of each scene. Give bite-sized chunks. Don't necessarily get them to performance level in rehearsal, especially the early rehearsals. What we need to do first is just get them on, off, out of the chair and walking around the room and not running into things. Great, that's blocking, right? As you're polishing things, you can add things like gesture. You can add things like, raising an eyebrow, pointing a finger, all those things. Again, my suggestion to you is not to say don't. Don't give it a negative note. Make it a positive note. Say, how about that? So that's you're doing great. At this moment, just to try something different. Why don't you try doing this or changing that? Make it a positive note. I really like the way that you're handling this. This part of it seems awkward to me based on this other information. Yes, try it. How about this? Get a give and take between your actors. Let them make some choices and honor those choices. It gives the actor the sense that they're contributing to their character. Yes. Again, ultimate decision is up to you, but that doing a little kinetic energy and knowing that as in a symphony, we keep talking about symphonies, but as in a symphony, there is a responsibility. The bass drum has the responsibility, and it's for the rhythm. That's its job, right? The violins are carrying melodies, yes. That's their job, right? The higher end instruments, piccolos, that sort of stuff, are filling in harmony, that sort of thing. Everybody's got their job and their function in the show, and you can't just have people suddenly break off and start pretending they're a fiddle when they're a bass drum. Yes. Now, I'm going to use, and again, I would say this is something you can do as an exercise in rehearsal. Ask your characters, ask your actors, if their character were an animal, what animal would it be? If it were a dog, for instance, what kind of dog would it be? Now, let's say you've got an actor who is a Chihuahua, who that's the way their energy is. They just are pent up. They're off the wall all the time. Yes. Well, if you cast that Chihuahua as a Saint Bernard, you're going to have problems because there is just no way that a Chihuahua is ever going to be a Saint Bernard, nor could the Saint Bernard be a Chihuahua. It's going to fail. So again, as a director, and I know a lot of times you have to make directing choices, casting choices just based on the pool of actors you have. But that's where you have to sort of alter your interpretation and say, all right, I understand that it's written as a Saint Bernard, but all I had were Chihuahuas. Can we make this work? For instance, we did a production of Measure for Measure a couple of years ago, and it just so happened that the guys that I cast as the bad evil doers that had to be thrown in prison all happened to be large men. And it just so happened, I did not plan this, but it just so happened that the police officers all wound up being these very scant, thin couple of ladies, a little bitty guy that had to throw them in prison. All right? There's just no way that they're gonna be thrown in prison. And so you make a gag out of it. And unfortunately for the play, it could handle that comedic moment. And again, it could have been a choice that I made in the casting of the show, but as it happened, it was just a choice that was forced upon me because of the way the show happened to work out, right? So keep yourself aware of those situations, make alterations as you can, but again, you're telling the story with these people, and those people are gonna have their assets. Focus on those assets, and you may have to pare down what your initial intent may have been, yes? We talked about bite-sized chunks. Stay calm, Stay focused, stay clear, yes? Again, you need to have a common ground of terms. You may need a set of definitions. Obviously, stage right, stage left, up stage, down stage, that goes without saying. But things like faster than what? Louder. I'm going to just tell a story on my good friend Emily Alvandañez. Some of you may know her. Emily in the green room, when she's just talking to people, is the loudest thing you have ever heard on this earth. But when she got on stage, when you said, please can you get any louder, it was a loud whisper. And I would go to her and say, listen, I hear you better in the green room talking to your friends when you're off stage than when you're on stage acting. I know you've got it in you got to get it out on stage, yes? And so again, pointing out things, sometimes it can be embarrassing. I'm sure if she sees this video, she will, Mike. But you've got to be able to find ways to get actors to understand what loud is, what soft is. I had the opposite problem I was doing a show where I asked an actor to whisper, and she refused to have any more than a stage whisper. You still have voice in it. I was like, no, a whisper. That's no voice. It's a whisper. You press. Trust me. You're talking about something that's very serious. Everyone is listening. Yes. And so again, as a director, finding the peaks, the valleys, where loud things happen, where soft things happen, and letting the actors understand that even though they may feel like there may be an exclamation point, which indicates they're yelling, that cannot be the loudest thing in the show because the show is shaped around this moment being the loudest moment, etc. Yes? Again, the actors aren't going to care about the arc, they're going to care about their moment. So finding a different way of approaching the character. Just as an exercise, I would always encourage actors to go against surface. Whatever the surface was, if they were yelling and screaming, try taking it under. For instance, I'll just use my dad as an example. When he would yell at us to get in the car, get in the car! We weren't in trouble. Come on, let's go! We were in trouble. But when he whispered it, get in the car. We were about to get our ass kicked. So try the opposite. Whatever the emotional level is, if it's soft, if it's loud, if it's, whatever the peak or the valley is, try the counterpoint. Just A, it's more interesting psychologically, but B, it may give you different avenues into ways of interpreting the character. So again, trust your instincts, all that sort of stuff. Never assume anything. You need to always make sure that actors are doing their due diligence and learning their lines. Again, if you need to set up meetings with stage managers separately, if you need to have, if you need yourself, need to set up line studying rehearsals with other actors. Keep a pulse on things. Make sure things are going apace, and because it's better to learn early that somebody's not studying their lines than to find out too late, right? It's better to find out too early that the set is having problems being built because of different issues that you may or may not be able to help, than too late, right? And that way, if you need to make changes, alterations, you can approach them from a more intelligent aspect rather than a have to, last minute kind of solution that you're gonna find. Again, even though you've asked for things to be done and assume that they're done, just again, as with everything, make sure that you've got your pulse on things to make sure these things have been done. I would just as a natural habit, when every night you see your actors, be gracious. Hey, how's it going? A little introduction, that sort of thing. You get just a sense that they're doing okay or not. Again, things happen in people's lives, right? Boyfriends, girlfriends break up. Families have issues. There may be a day when it's just better. You know what? It's just nothing against you, but it might be better to have the understudy rehearsal tonight, and we'll get back to you this weekend. School, especially in school with the issues that people have, it may be better for them to study for an exam and pass the exam and get that out of the way, in a particular night than to be at the rehearsal when you're just blocking things or going through stuff that they can be caught up on. Yes. So again, keep your hand on the pulse. Make sure you're in connection with everybody and know the flow of things that are going on. Again, you need to be in contact with stage management and develop a trusting relationship with them, because they are going to be your backbone in these issues as time goes by. As you're getting into working on these plays, one of the things as a director that you need to develop is, well, I'm going to say listen with your eyes. You need to see the play fresh every single rehearsal, because even though in your mind's eye you may have blocked the show and have everything just worked out perfectly on paper, you need to put that away, and despite the fact the actors may be doing exactly what you told them to do, you need to watch it anew as if you never heard the story before, don't know the story. What can I hear? What can't I hear? How do I need to change the blocking? Again, one of the things about soft-spoken actors, a way to help them is to block them closer to the audience. So it may be by merely changing where people are on stage, you can help solve the problem rather than giving the note of be louder. Because again, be louder doesn't necessarily, it lets them know they're too soft, but it doesn't necessarily let an actor know how to get their character to develop that loudness. One of the things that actors often have, I'm gonna say their fallback is gonna be 75% themselves, right? For instance, if I'm in a show, just to use myself as an example, I'm gonna be big and bold and gregarious because that's who I am as my first choice, right? It isn't, if I'm playing somebody who's meek and mild, it's not gonna be my first choice. It's gonna be something the director is going to have to sort of mold me into. Can I get there? Sure, I've done it before. But it takes, that's not my fallback choice. And that's true of many actors. Many actors are gonna fall back into their own personal history, their own personal ways of walking and talking and acting, then they are gonna be developing characters based, I'm gonna say Meryl Streep, for instance, I think blends into whatever character she's playing. Devil Wears Prada is nothing like the woman from Madison County. Right? It's nothing like the Sophie's Choice. Yes, they're all distinct, individual. They've got melodies and different ways of speaking that just show training and expertise as an actor. Jack Nicholson, same thing. I don't know, A Few Good Men, amazing. Nothing else he ever did. Joker, like nothing else he ever did. He's able to find character and traits and gestures and all those sort of things. But those are great actors, right? I'm gonna say Tom Hanks. I think Tom Hanks is a great actor, but he's got a fallback Tom Hanks that it's trust. It's the same thing with Jimmy Stewart, for instance. Jimmy Stewart has got a couple of great roles that he is somebody other than Jimmy Stewart, but just as a person, if he couldn't find necessarily the key to something different, he did Jimmy Stewart and he was fine. Same thing I think with Tom Hanks. He's got some great characters. Forrest Gump, great character. The guy in the World War II film. Saving Private Ryan, fantastic. But I think he's got a fallback character that he sort of falls back into that is still quality, but it isn't. He doesn't disappear into his character the way that Meryl Streep does. Yes, and so you're hoping to find actors who can disappear. What most times you're left with are actors who are going to be 80% themselves, and maybe add a walk or a talk or a lisp or something like that. Yes. You've adorned some part of them, right? Again, if the more time you have, the more training the actors have, the more you can go in depth to find those characteristics and change them, the better. But you're gonna typically be left with dealing with the actors the way they are in life, yes? All right, so today we're talking a little bit, just framing the argument. Next class period, we're gonna talk about table work and what you're gonna do with table work. And then we'll actually get into physically staging the show and blocking the next class period. So enjoy, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.